Ifeanyi Okoro, 28, stepped off the bus in Lagos after a long day at her architecture firm, thinking about the usual deadlines, designs, and the little apartment she rented in the bustling city. She had no idea that today her life was about to flip upside down. Her parents, Chidi and Amara Okoro, had been acting strange all week, dropping hints about some big news from the lawyer. Ifeanyi brushed it off at first, assuming it was just another family drama. The truth was her family had been summoned to the office of Grandpa Emeka's lawyer. Grandpa Emeka, a man whose name carried weight across Lagos, had passed away a few months earlier, leaving behind a fortune people could only dream of. His sprawling mansion on Victoria Island, worth a staggering $14 million, was the crown jewel of the inheritance. Chidi and Amara were already daydreaming about how they would decorate it, entertain guests, and finally enjoy the lifestyle they'd always wanted. They assumed it would all go to them without question. Ifeanyi, however, had a quiet feeling deep down that something was off. Grandpa Emeka had always been more than just a grandfather. He had been her mentor, encouraging her ambitions and quietly teaching her about responsibility, investment, and integrity. Still, she never imagined that the reading of the will would change everything, shifting the power in ways her parents could never anticipate. As she walked past the familiar streets toward home, she had no idea that in just a few hours, the mansion her parents thought was theirs forever might just become hers, and that the simple life she knew would be replaced by a world she had only dreamed of. The moment Ifeanyi stepped into Grandpa Emeka's mansion, she felt a rush of memories flooding back. The grand colonial estate stretched endlessly, its tall white pillars and polished marble floors gleaming in the sunlight. The sound of waves crashing against the shore below drifted in through the huge glass windows, mixing with the faint smell of polished wood and fresh flowers. This mansion had always been more than just a house. It was a symbol of her grandfather's life, his success, and somehow his quiet love for her. She remembered running through these halls as a little girl, Grandpa Emeka's warm laughter echoing around her. He had always encouraged her dreams, listening patiently as she talked about buildings she wanted to design, about saving and investing, and about turning small ideas into something big. He had taught her to think ahead, to be careful but ambitious. In contrast, her parents had never taken her seriously. They would brush off her ideas with a shrug or a dismissive smile, assuming that wealth and power were theirs to claim by default. Now, seeing her parents move through the mansion like it already belonged to them, Ifeanyi felt a quiet mix of amusement and disbelief. Chidi and Amara walked slowly, touching the intricate moldings on the walls, opening the heavy doors, and imagining themselves hosting grand parties in the ballrooms. They whispered to each other about redecorating, renovating, and filling every room with their own taste. To them, this house was a trophy they had always deserved, and nothing could shake that belief. For Ifeanyi, though, the mansion was different. She saw it as a living reminder of her grandfather's lessons and of the trust he had placed in her. Every corner, every hallway, every sunlit room reminded her of the afternoons they had spent together talking about the future, of the plans he had quietly guided her through. And while her parents were busy dreaming about ownership, she felt the first stirrings of something else. A quiet certainty that her grandfather's final wishes might not be what they expected. The mansion was beautiful, grand, and overwhelming, but for Ifeanyi, it held a deeper meaning. It was more than money or status. It was a bridge between her past and the future her grandfather had envisioned for her, a future her parents had never truly understood. The grand drawing room of Grandpa Emeka's mansion was buzzing with tension. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, reflecting off the marble floors and crystal chandeliers, while the family gathered around, faces a mix of anticipation and pride. At the center stood lawyer Adeola Balogun, a sharp, meticulous professional from Abuja, adjusting his glasses as he prepared to read the will. His presence was commanding. Every word he spoke would carry weight, and everyone in the room knew it. Ifeanyi stood quietly to the side, her notebook in hand, though she didn't plan to write anything down. She had insisted on having the moment recorded by a local family vlog crew, though her parents had no idea. Let them have their show of pride, she thought, letting the cameras capture everything. Every glance, every whisper, every reaction. He wanted a record just in case. As Adeola began reading, his voice calm and measured, the opening paragraphs were filled with the usual formalities. Dates, legal jargon, signatures. For a moment it seemed ordinary, almost boring. Then came the allocations. At first it sounded exactly like her parents expected. Chidi and Amara exchanged subtle smiles, their eyes lighting up as the lawyer read out furniture, jewelry, bank accounts and other assets, all seemingly theirs. They were nodding, already imagining themselves settling in and enjoying the mansion as if it were theirs by right. But Ifeananya wasn't so easily fooled. Her instincts had been humming all week. There was something in her grandfather's tone, in the way he had spoken to her over the years, that told her this was more than a simple inheritance. She noticed the subtle wording, the pauses between sentences, the carefully chosen phrases. She didn't need to speak. Her mind was already racing ahead, piecing together what could come next. As the reading continued, the room was filled with polite nods and quiet excitement from her parents. But behind her calm expression, Ifeananya felt the quiet thrill of knowing something big was about to shift, something her parents would never see coming. The mansion, the fortune, the control, they were about to be redefined, and she was ready to see the moment unfold. Just as Chidi and Amara exchanged proud, triumphant glances, imagining the mansion fully in their hands, lawyer Adeola Balogun paused. The sudden silence in the grand drawing room was almost deafening. He cleared his throat slowly, adjusting his glasses, and looked each of them in the eye. "There's one line here that's very important," he said, his voice calm but firm. The room seemed to hold its breath. Chidi leaned forward slightly, thinking perhaps it was a minor detail, something to skip over. But Adela's next words made the air crack with tension. The mansion, while technically inherited by Chidi and Amara, was actually held in trust for Ifeananya Okoro, the only surviving granddaughter who had always maintained a close bond with Grandpa Emeka. For a split second no one moved. Then as the words sank in, the room exploded with disbelief. Chidi's jaw tightened and Amara's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her handbag. They had never expected this, never even considered that their daughter could take precedence over them. Their triumphant smiles disappeared, replaced with shock and confusion. They looked at each other as if silently asking, "Did we hear that right?" Ifeananya stood quietly, her heart pounding but her face calm. She had sensed something like this might happen, and yet seeing it unfold before her parents' eyes gave her a strange thrill. All those years of being dismissed, overlooked and underestimated, it was all about to change in one moment. Around them, the mansion seemed to echo the sudden tension. The walls, the floors, the chandeliers, they had been silent witnesses to this family drama, and now every corner seemed to hum with the weight of Grandpa Emeka's final decision. Even the cameras recording the event caught the raw, unfiltered reactions. Her parents frozen, unsure, and her own quiet composure. It was a twist no one had seen coming. The power in the room had shifted silently but decisively. Chidi and Amara had assumed control for themselves, but now in an instant, it was clear that the mansion, and the authority it represented, belonged in truth to Ifeananya. And for the first time, everyone understood that the girl they had always underestimated might just be the one holding all the cards. The room was still heavy with shock when lawyer Adeola Balogun continued, his voice calm but firm, making sure every word landed. "There are specific conditions attached to this inheritance," he said, letting his words hang in the air like thunder. "Ifeananya Okoro is now the legal owner of all decision-making powers over the mansion. This includes any renovations, rentals, or even the option to sell it." Chidi and Amara froze, their minds racing. Their faces betrayed confusion, frustration, and disbelief all at once. They had walked into this room expecting to claim the mansion as their own, imagining endless control over every room, every door, every piece of furniture. And now, in a single sentence, everything they had assumed was gone. Adela's gaze swept across the room. "Your parents may continue to live here," he added, "but only with your consent, Ifeananya. Any attempt to bypass this authority, any unauthorized decision regarding the mansion, will be considered a violation of the trust and could result in legal action." The weight of his words sank in slowly. The mansion wasn't just a house anymore. It was a symbol of control, respect, and loyalty. For years, Chidi and Amara had assumed they could bend things to their will, that their daughter's opinions didn't matter. But now the tables had turned completely. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that Ifeananya wasn't just Grandpa Emeka's favorite. She was the rightful authority, the one he had trusted to protect his legacy. Ifeanyanya's heart raced, but she remained composed. She could feel a strange mix of satisfaction and responsibility. This wasn't about revenge or showing her parents who was stronger. It was about doing what was right. For her, the mansion represented more than money or power. It was a chance to honor her grandfather's wishes, to prove that loyalty and hard work mattered more than entitlement or expectation. Her parents whispered to each other, trying to grasp the reality of the situation, but there was no turning back. Every detail in the will, every carefully written line, confirmed what they couldn't ignore. Ifeananya had full authority, and their assumption that the mansion was theirs was completely shattered. The silence that followed was thick with tension, the kind that comes when a family realizes the rules of the game have changed, and the game had just shifted entirely in her favor. Chidi and Amara could barely hide their frustration. Their faces were tight with anger, their voices low but tense as they whispered back and forth, trying to figure out how to turn the situation in their favor. "Maybe there's a mistake," Chidi muttered, glancing at the lawyer. "Surely this can be fixed." Amara shook her head, biting her lip, her mind racing with schemes and excuses. They had always assumed the mansion was theirs, and now in one moment that belief had been ripped away. Lawyer Adeola Balogun listened patiently but made it clear that nothing could change. He calmly explained the terms again, emphasizing the trust documents and legal precedents. Every time they tried to argue or question him, he responded with quiet authority, leaving no room for negotiation. Chidi and Amara's whispers grew more frantic, but the truth was undeniable. The mansion, the power, and the control were all in Ifeanyanya's hands. Ifeananya, standing quietly to the side, felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She remembered the lessons Grandpa Emeka had taught her, how to stay patient, how to observe, and how to gather evidence of her rights without losing her cool. She didn't need to raise her voice or argue. Her confidence and composure said everything her parents needed to hear. She had already won the most important battle, keeping her cool while they struggled to process the reality. Outside the drawing room, friends and neighbors who had been quietly watching the scene began to murmur among themselves. Some shook their heads in disbelief, commenting on Chidi and Amara's sense of entitlement, how they had assumed the mansion would be theirs without question. Others whispered about Ifeanyanya's grace under pressure, impressed by her poise and intelligence. It was clear to everyone, the power dynamic had shifted, and the parents' frustration only highlighted the stark contrast between their greed and her quiet strength. For the first time, Chidi and Amara realized that underestimating Ifeananya had been a huge mistake. Their anger, whispers, and frantic attempts at negotiation did nothing but expose how little control they really had. Meanwhile, Ifeananya stood silently, letting them struggle while knowing that the future of the mansion, and the legacy of her grandfather, was now hers to protect and shape. As the initial shock in the room began to settle, Ifeananya felt a quiet thrill building inside her. The mansion was no longer just a grand house. It was a symbol of something much bigger. It represented her intelligence, her patience, and the loyalty she had shown to Grandpa Emeka all those years. For the first time, she understood that this inheritance wasn't just about money or status. It was a recognition of her character, a reward for the dedication she had quietly shown while her parents assumed control would always be theirs. Her mind raced with possibilities. She pictured the marble halls filled with light and life, spaces transformed into something meaningful for the community she loved. She remembered the project she had once discussed with her grandfather, a local art and cultural hub, a place where young artists, musicians, and entrepreneurs could showcase their talents and learn from one another. Suddenly, what had been a dream felt tangible, within her grasp and completely under her control. Meanwhile, her parents were still reeling, whispering to each other, trying to find a loophole, a way to regain the dominance they had taken for granted. But Ifeanyanya's calm composure only highlighted the shift in power. The balance had changed, and it was clear who held the authority now. No amount of anger, negotiation, or manipulation could reverse what Grandpa Emeka had carefully planned. She felt a surge of quiet pride as she realized this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a moment of justice. Years of being underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed had culminated in this instant. She didn't need to shout, argue, or assert herself aggressively. Her victory was silent but undeniable. The mansion, the authority, and the ability to shape her future were hers, and she intended to use them wisely. As she stood in the grand drawing room, watching her parents struggle to process the reality, Ifeananya allowed herself a small, private smile. For years she had been patient, working quietly, learning, observing, and preparing. Now the payoff was clear. The mansion was hers, the power was hers, and the chance to honor her grandfather's vision, and her own, was finally hers to seize. Chidi could no longer hold back. His face red with frustration, he stepped closer to Ifeananya, voice low but sharp. "You're forgetting who raised you," he said, trying to assert control as if years of authority at home could still work here. "This is our family. You don't just decide everything. Ifeananya met his gaze calmly, her voice steady. Grandpa Emeka's will is very clear, she said. This isn't about disrespecting you. It's about honoring his wishes. The mansion is held in trust for me. That means I make the decisions. You can live here but only under the conditions he set. Her words seemed to strike a chord of disbelief in her parents. Amara fidgeted nervously, whispering under her breath, trying to find a way to twist the situation. Chitty's jaw clenched, but before he could argue further, lawyer Adeola stepped forward, his tone firm and precise. The trust documents are legally binding, he said. Any attempt to bypass her authority would be a violation of the law. Legal precedents make this very clear. This is not up for debate. The room grew tense, but Ifeananya remained composed. Every whisper, every attempted manipulation from her parents only strengthened her resolve. She had spent years being underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked, and now, in the very mansion her parents thought they controlled, the truth was undeniable. The authority she had quietly earned could not be shaken by anger, threats, or intimidation. Outside, the cameras recorded every moment, the subtle expressions, the whispered frustrations, and the growing realization in her parents' faces that nothing they tried would change the outcome. Friends and neighbors watching the footage later would marvel at her calmness and intelligence, the way she handled a confrontation that could have easily spiraled out of control. By the time the confrontation ended, it was clear. Chitty and Amara had overplayed their hand for years, assuming that Ifeananya would always defer to them. But now the tables had turned completely. Their attempts at manipulation had backfired spectacularly, and the mansion, along with the power and respect it symbolized, belonged to her. In that moment she didn't need to celebrate out loud. Her quiet confidence and steadfast composure were the loudest victory she could claim. It didn't take long for news of the will's twist to spread. Within hours, clips from the mansion's reading, filmed secretly by Ifeananya, were all over social media. Her friends shared the videos, local news outlets picked up the story, and soon everyone in Lagos and beyond was talking about what had happened in the Grand Victoria Island mansion. People were stunned. The footage showed Ifeananya calm, composed, and confident, while her parents struggled to process the unexpected revelation. The story highlighted more than just the inheritance. It showed her intelligence, patience, and quiet strength. Comments flooded online. People admired how she handled a tense, emotional situation without raising her voice or losing her cool. Every gesture, every word spoke volumes about the kind of person she was. Someone who could manage wealth, responsibility, and family drama with grace. Chitty and Amara, on the other hand, faced a wave of criticism. Posts and articles called out their sense of entitlement, pointing out how they had assumed the mansion was theirs while ignoring Ifeanyanya's dedication and loyalty to her grandfather. Friends, neighbors, and strangers alike commented on how quickly the balance of power had shifted, how the parents' long-held assumptions had collapsed under the weight of truth and fairness. For Ifeananya, the attention was almost surreal. She wasn't seeking fame, but she realized that this public recognition was powerful in its own right. The mansion was no longer just a home. It had become a symbol of her rise, her rightful place, and her grandfather's trust in her. People didn't just see her as the granddaughter who inherited wealth. They saw her as a role model, someone who had turned a family conflict into a story of empowerment, responsibility, and grace under pressure. Even in casual conversations at work, on the streets, and online, everyone seemed to know her name. Articles praised her for showing that intelligence, loyalty, and patience could triumph over arrogance and entitlement. The mansion itself became a symbol not of family wealth alone, but of her rightful recognition and the respect she had earned, quietly, wisely, and without compromising who she was. By the end of the day, Ifeananya realized that the story had grown bigger than the walls of the mansion. It had become a lesson in integrity, patience, and the power of staying true to oneself, even when the people closest to you don't expect it. With full control over the mansion, Ifeananya finally began to bring her vision to life. One wing of the grand estate was transformed into a cultural hub, a place where young artists, musicians, and entrepreneurs could showcase their talents, learn new skills, and connect with others who shared their passions. She wanted the mansion to be more than a symbol of wealth. It would become a space that gave back to the community, just like she and her grandfather had once dreamed. Even with her new authority, Ifeananya chose to handle her parents carefully. She reconciled with them, but on her own terms. They were allowed limited privileges, occasional use of certain rooms, invitations to family events, but she made it clear that the final say always belonged to her. There was no room for manipulation, no place for entitlement. This wasn't about punishment. It was about respect, boundaries, and the lessons they had failed to teach themselves over the years. Standing on the balcony one evening, the warm Lagos sun painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Ifeanyi took a deep breath. She looked over the mansion, the ocean glimmering beyond, and felt a quiet sense of triumph. What had started as a family dispute over money and control had turned into something far greater. Her grandfather's trust, her patience, and her loyalty had paved the way for not just personal success, but for a legacy she could be proud of. For the first time, Ifeanyi truly felt the power of perseverance. She had taken what could have been a bitter conflict and transformed it into opportunity, growth, and empowerment. The mansion no longer represented just an inheritance. It represented her journey, her choices, and the strength she had quietly carried all along. She smiled, knowing this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one she would write entirely on her own terms.